The bucket clattered to the floor, soapy water spreading across the already spotless tiles, as Matron Phelps's shrill voice echoed through the orphanage corridors. "Worthless girl! You are only good for scrubbing floors, Catherine Mills. Nothing more and nothing less." The year was 1876, and Catherine had heard those words so many times they had carved themselves into her heart like initials on a prison wall. Catherine dropped to her knees, her worn cotton dress soaking up the spilled water as she scrambled to right the bucket. At 22 years old, she had spent the last 14 years within these unforgiving walls of the Rocky Mountain Orphanage in Rico, Colorado. The small mining town sat nestled in the San Juan Mountains, where silver strikes had brought fortune seekers and left behind their unwanted children. Catherine had been one of them, abandoned when fever took her parents during an outbreak that decimated half the mining camp. "I am sorry, matron," Catherine whispered, keeping her eyes fixed on the floor. Her auburn hair, once vibrant and full of life, hung in a limp braid down her back. Years of inadequate food and endless labor had left her too thin, though her features still held a delicate beauty that no amount of hardship could completely erase. Matron Phelps, a large woman whose pinched face seemed permanently twisted in disapproval, stepped closer until her polished boots nearly touched Catherine's trembling hands. "Sorry means nothing. You have been here longer than any child should be. Most girls find positions by 18, but you? Too clumsy, too quiet, too plain. No one wants you in their household, no man wants you as a wife. You will scrub floors here until you die, mark my words." The other children had learned long ago not to interfere when Matron Phelps unleashed her cruelty on Catherine. They scattered like mice, disappearing into dormitories and closets. Only little Emma, a 6-year-old with golden curls, peeked around the corner with tears in her wide blue eyes. Catherine had become like a mother to Emma and several other young ones, the only tenderness they knew in this harsh place. That evening, as Catherine lay on her narrow cot in the attic room she shared with 3 other older girls who mostly ignored her, she stared at the wooden beams overhead and wondered if the matron was right. Perhaps she truly was worthless, fit only for the endless cycle of washing, scrubbing, mending, and cooking that filled her days. The other girls her age had found positions as housekeepers, shop assistants, or wives, but Matron Phelps had turned away every potential employer who inquired about Catherine, always finding some fault to mention, some reason why Catherine was unsuitable. The truth, which Catherine had slowly realized over the years, was that Matron Phelps needed her. Catherine worked harder than any 2 people combined, and the matron paid her nothing beyond the same meager food and shelter provided to the children. It was a form of bondage dressed up as Christian charity. Sleep came fitfully, and Catherine woke before dawn as she always did. She dressed in the same faded gray dress, splashed cold water on her face from the basin, and descended the narrow stairs to begin preparing breakfast for 30 children and the matron. Her hands moved through the familiar motions of stoking the fire, mixing batter, slicing bread. The repetitive work allowed her mind to wander to forbidden places, imagining a life beyond these walls, a life where someone might value her for more than her ability to scrub floors. 3 weeks later, everything changed. Jacob Rollins rode into Rico on a horse the color of midnight, leading a pack mule loaded with furs and supplies. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to block out the sun and arms that showed the kind of strength that came from years of surviving in the wilderness. His dark hair fell past his collar, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his weathered face. At 30 years old, he had spent the last decade living in the high country, trapping beaver and marten, hunting elk, and avoiding civilization as much as possible. But winter had been brutal, and he needed supplies he could not make or trade for in the scattered camps of other mountain men. More than that, he needed something he had been denying for years, human connection, a reason to come down from the mountains for good. He tied his horse outside the general store and noticed the orphanage across the street, a large wooden building that seemed to hunker against the mountainside like something ashamed of itself. Children's faces appeared briefly in windows before being pulled away. Something about the place set his teeth on edge, though he could not say why. Inside the store, Jacob purchased flour, salt, coffee, and other staples. The shopkeeper, a talkative man named Henderson, seemed eager for conversation. "You are the mountain man who has that cabin up near Lizard Head Pass, are you not?" Henderson asked as he wrapped the purchases. "That would be me," Jacob replied, his voice rough from disuse. He spoke rarely in the mountains, sometimes going weeks without saying a word aloud. "Fine furs you brought in. The buyer from Denver will pay top dollar for those beaver pelts. Henderson leaned across the counter, lowering his voice. You ever think about settling down? Town could use more strong men. Silver mines are playing out, but there is still opportunity for those willing to work. Jacob shrugged, uncomfortable with the question. He had left settlement life behind after losing his parents and younger brother to a Comanche raid in Texas. The mountains had become his refuge, but lately they felt more like a prison of his own making. I will think on it, he said, gathering his parcels. As he stepped outside, a commotion drew his attention to the orphanage. The front door burst open, and Matron Phelps dragged a young woman by the arm, shoving her down the steps. The woman stumbled but did not fall, catching herself with the kind of grace that suggested years of practice at recovering from rough treatment. You are useless, completely useless, the matron screamed. You burned the bread, let the fire go out, and tracked mud through the hall I told you to clean. You are only good for scrubbing floors, and apparently you cannot even do that properly anymore. The young woman, whom Jacob would soon know as Catherine, stood with her head bowed, hands clasped in front of her stained apron. Her lips moved, probably apologizing again for sins real or imagined. Several townspeople had stopped to watch the spectacle, but no one intervened. This was apparently common enough to draw spectators, but not helpers. Something in Jacob's chest tightened. He had seen men beat horses and dogs with less viciousness than the verbal lashing this matron delivered. Without thinking it through, he found himself crossing the street, his boots thudding against the packed dirt. "Madam," he said, his voice cutting through the matron's tirade. "That is enough." Matron Phelps whirled to face him, her face flushed with rage. "This is none of your concern, sir. This girl is under my care, and I will discipline her as I see fit." Jacob looked past the matron to the young woman. She had raised her eyes just enough for him to see their color, a striking green that reminded him of pine needles after rain. Those eyes held pain, but also something else, a spark of defiance not quite extinguished by years of cruelty. In that moment, something fundamental shifted in his chest. "She looks like she could use some kindness instead of more discipline," Jacob said, keeping his voice level despite the anger building inside him. "What exactly did she do to deserve being dragged into the street?" "She is lazy, incompetent, and clumsy. She has been here for 14 years, eating my food and taking up space, giving nothing back but inferior work." The matron's voice had taken on a hysterical edge. "She is only good for scrubbing floors, and barely that." Jacob took a step closer, using his considerable size to his advantage. He was not a violent man by nature, but he knew how to make himself intimidating when necessary. "Seems to me that if she's been working for you for 14 years, she's given back plenty. You get paid by the county for each child here, do you not?" The matron's face went from red to purple. "How dare you? I run a Christian establishment. These children would starve without my charity." "Does not look much like charity from where I stand." Jacob turned his attention fully to Catherine. "What is your name, miss?" Catherine's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Catherine Mills, sir." "How old are you, Catherine?" 22, sir." Jacob felt his anger deepen. 22 was well past the age when anyone should be held in an orphanage. "You are a grown woman, not a child. Why are you still here?" Before Catherine could answer, Matron Phelps interjected. "She has nowhere else to go, no skills, no family, no prospects. I keep her out of Christian duty, despite her many failings." "I have skills," Catherine said suddenly, her voice gaining strength. "I cook, clean, sew, tend gardens, care for children, manage households. I do all of that here, every single day." "Poorly," the matron shrieked. "You do it all poorly." Jacob had heard enough. He addressed Catherine directly, ignoring the matron entirely. "I have a proposition for you, Catherine Mills. I live up in the mountains, in a cabin that has not seen a woman's touch in 10 years. I could use someone to help with the domestic work while I focus on trapping and hunting. I can pay you room, board, and a small wage. You would have your own space, and I give you my word as a gentleman that you would be safe and respected." The words had come out before he fully thought them through, but once spoken, he realized how right they felt. He had been lonely, though he had never admitted it even to himself, and something about this woman called to him in a way he did not fully understand. Catherine stared at him with wide eyes, her mouth slightly open in shock. You... Sir, I do not even know you. Name is Jacob Rollins. I have lived in these mountains for 10 years, and Henderson over at the store can vouch that I am honest and honorable. You would be an employee, nothing more unless you decided otherwise. I am not offering marriage or anything improper, just honest work for honest pay." Matron Phelps had recovered her composure. She cannot leave. She is bound to the orphanage until I release her. She is 22 years old, Jacob said, his voice dropping into a dangerous register. She is not bound to anyone, unless you have legal papers saying otherwise. The matron's silence was answer enough. They both knew she had no legal hold on Catherine, only the psychological chains forged by years of abuse and isolation. Catherine looked between Jacob and the matron, and Jacob could see the war playing out behind her eyes. Fear of the unknown battled against desperation for escape. He waited, knowing the decision had to be hers. "I will go fetch my things," Catherine said finally, her voice trembling but determined. Matron Phelps lunged forward as if to grab her, but Jacob simply moved between them, his presence a wall the older woman would not dare try to breach. Catherine disappeared into the orphanage, and Jacob stood watch, aware of the townspeople still gathered around. Let them watch. Let them see someone finally stand up to the tyrant who had been mistreating children under the guise of charity. Catherine reappeared within minutes, carrying a small cloth bag that apparently held all her worldly possessions. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and he realized she had been crying. As she descended the steps, 3 small children rushed out behind her, wrapping their arms around her waist. "Katie, do not go!" The smallest one, a girl with golden curls, sobbed, "Please do not leave us." Catherine knelt down, gathering all 3 children into her arms. "Oh, Emma, sweet Emma, and Thomas and Mary, I have to go, my darlings, but you will be all right. You are strong and brave, and you have each other." "But we need you," the boy Thomas said. "Who will tell us stories at night? Who will make sure the matron does not hit us?" Jacob felt his jaw clench. So it was not just verbal abuse then. "You must look after each other," Catherine said, her voice breaking. "Emma, you are clever as can be. Thomas, you are brave and strong. Mary, you are kind and gentle. You have everything you need inside yourselves. And I promise, I will think of you every single day." It took several minutes for Catherine to extract herself from the children's embraces. The matron had retreated into the orphanage, perhaps sensing she had already lost this battle. Jacob helped Catherine climb onto his horse, then swung up behind her. Her body was stiff with tension, clearly uncomfortable with the proximity to a strange man. "Wrap this around you," he said, offering her a blanket from his pack. "It is a long ride up the mountain, and the temperature drops considerably." As they rode out of Rico, Jacob felt Catherine twist to look back at the orphanage one last time. He could feel her trembling, whether from cold or emotion he could not tell. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. "You deserve better than that." She did not respond, but after a few minutes he felt her relax slightly against him. The horse knew the way home, and Jacob focused on holding the reins loosely, trying not to think about how right it felt to have this woman sitting in front of him, how her scent, despite the harsh lye soap she must have used, carried a hint of something sweet and distinctly feminine. The ride took 4 hours, climbing steadily into the high country. They passed through stands of aspen and pine, crossed crystal streams running with snowmelt, and startled a small herd of elk grazing in a meadow. Jacob pointed out landmarks as they went, partly to orient Catherine, and partly to fill the silence that had grown heavy between them. "That peak there is Lizard Head. My cabin sits in a valley just below it. There's a stream running past the door, a barn for the horse and mule, and a root cellar that stays cool year-round. The cabin itself is one large room, with a loft for sleeping. I will rig up a curtain to give you privacy." "You really live up here all alone?" Catherine asked, her voice small against the vast wilderness surrounding them. "I do. Sometimes I run into other trappers, and I go down to Rico 3 or 4 times a year for supplies. But mostly it is just me and the mountains." "Why?" The question was simple, but the answer was not. Jacob took his time responding. "Lost my family when I was 20. Raiders killed my parents and younger brother while I was out hunting. I came home to find them gone. After that, I could not stand being around people, seeing families, hearing children laugh. It hurt too much. So I came up here where the only thing that could hurt me was the weather and wild animals. Seemed safer somehow." Catherine turned her head slightly, and he caught a glimpse of her profile. "I'm sorry for your loss. I know what it is like to lose family." "The fever outbreak of '62? "Yes. One day I had parents who loved me, a home, a future. The next day I was alone, and Matron Phelps was telling me I should be grateful for her charity." "She was wrong," Jacob said firmly, "about everything she said about you. You are not worthless, and you are certainly good for more than scrubbing floors." Catherine did not respond, but he felt her relax a bit more against his chest. The cabin came into view as they crested a ridge. It sat in a small valley surrounded by towering pines, with a clear stream running past the front door. Smoke should have been coming from the chimney, but the place had been empty for the 3 days Jacob had been in Rico. The logs were weathered but solid, and the roof looked secure. It was simple, rough, and utterly isolated. Jacob helped Catherine dismount, noticing how her legs wobbled after the long ride. She had probably never ridden a horse for more than a few minutes before today. "Come inside and sit while I tend to the animals," he said. "There should still be wood by the fireplace. Do you know how to start a fire?" "Yes, sir." "Jacob. Just call me Jacob. I've never been comfortable with formality." She nodded, clutching her small bag as she approached the cabin door. Jacob watched her disappear inside before leading his horse and mule to the small barn. As he removed the saddle and began brushing down the animals, he wondered what exactly he had done. He had brought a complete stranger to his isolated cabin, a woman who had every reason to distrust men, and now they were going to be living in close quarters with no one around for miles. But when he pictured her face, those green eyes full of pain and buried hope, he knew he would do it all over again. Something about Catherine Mills had reached past all his defenses and touched the part of him he thought had died along with his family. When he returned to the cabin, a fire was crackling in the hearth, and Catherine stood in the center of the room, looking around with an expression he could not quite read. The cabin was indeed one large room, with a cooking area in one corner, a table and chairs in another, and his bed frame tucked against the far wall. A ladder led up to the loft where he stored supplies and extra furs. "I will move my things to the loft and give you the bed," Jacob said, "and I will rig up that curtain tomorrow to give you privacy for changing and such." "You do not have to give up your bed," Catherine protested. "I can sleep in the loft." "No, I brought you here, and I will make sure you are comfortable. Besides, I'm used to sleeping rough. A few nights on a bedroll in the loft will not hurt me." Catherine looked like she wanted to argue but thought better of it. Instead, she moved toward the cooking area, running her hand along the rough wooden counter. "When did you last have a proper meal?" Jacob thought about it. "Depends on what you mean by proper. I shot a deer 2 weeks ago, and I've been eating venison jerky and hardtack mostly." "Do you have any vegetables? Flour? Eggs?" "Flour, yes. I just bought supplies. No eggs unless you count the wild turkey eggs I find sometimes, and no vegetables except what grows wild." Catherine turned to look at him, and for the first time since he had met her, something like determination crossed her face. "If I am going to work for you, the first thing we need to do is plant a garden, and maybe get some chickens. A man cannot live on meat and flour alone." Jacob found himself almost smiling. "Yes, madam." As evening fell, Catherine prepared a simple meal of venison stew using some dried meat Jacob had stored, along with wild onions and herbs she found in his surprisingly well-stocked supply area. They ate in relative silence, both exhausted from the day's events and uncertain how to navigate this new arrangement. "I want to establish some rules," Jacob said as they finished eating. "So you feel safe here?" Catherine looked up, her expression guarded. "You have your space. I have mine. I will not enter your area without permission, and I expect the same courtesy. You are my employee, and I will pay you $5 a month plus room and board. If you ever want to leave, for any reason, you just say the word, and I will take you back to Rico or anywhere else you want to go. And most importantly, you never have to be afraid of me. I give you my word that I will never hurt you or force myself on you in any way." Catherine's eyes had filled with tears. "Why are you being so kind to me? You do not even know me." Jacob considered the question carefully. "I saw something in you today, standing there in the street while that woman tore you down. You could have been broken, and you had every right to be. But there was still fight in you, still hope buried deep. You reminded me that maybe it is time I came back to the world of the living, and maybe we can help each other do that." "I do not know if I remember how to hope," Catherine said quietly. 14 years is a long time. "Then we will learn together." That night, as Jacob lay in the loft listening to the soft sounds of Catherine settling into the bed below, he wondered what had possessed him. He had lived alone for a decade, content with solitude. Now he had invited a woman into his life, into his home, and everything felt suddenly uncertain and terrifying. But also right. Somehow, impossibly right. The next few weeks fell into a routine that surprised both of them with its ease. Catherine proved to be everything the matron had said she was not: skilled, hard-working, and intelligent. She cleaned the cabin thoroughly, organized his chaotic supplies, mended his clothes, and cooked meals that made him realize how much he had been merely surviving rather than living. More than that, she transformed the space itself. She found wildflowers and placed them in a chipped mug on the table. She aired out the furs and blankets, washed the windows until they gleamed, and somehow made the rough log cabin feel like a home. Jacob, for his part, kept his word about giving her space and privacy. He hung a heavy blanket to section off the sleeping area, giving her a corner of the cabin that was hers alone. He built her a proper dresser from pine logs and made sure to announce his presence before entering the cabin, giving her time to prepare for his arrival. But despite his best intentions to keep things strictly professional, Jacob found himself increasingly aware of Catherine in ways that had nothing to do with her work. The way she hummed softly while cooking, the grace of her movements as she went about her tasks, the rare smiles that lit up her face when something pleased her. She was beautiful, he realized, though years of mistreatment had taught her to hide that beauty behind plain dresses and a bowed head. One morning, about 3 weeks after Catherine's arrival, Jacob came in from checking his trap lines to find her kneeling in front of the cabin, marking out a large rectangle in the dirt. "Garden plan?" he asked. She looked up, shading her eyes against the morning sun. "Yes. If we plant now, we can have vegetables by late summer. Potatoes, carrots, beans, squash, maybe even some corn if the season is long enough." Jacob crouched beside her, studying the layout she had drawn. "You know farming? My father had a garden before he died. I remember helping him plant and weed, and the orphanage had a large garden that I tended for years. Matron Phelps said I had a gift for growing things, though she usually said it like it was a character flaw." "There is nothing flawed about being able to coax life from the earth," Jacob said. "I will help you turn the soil. The ground is still cold, but it should warm up enough for planting in another week or two." Working together in the garden over the next several days, Jacob and Catherine began to talk more freely. Catherine shared carefully edited stories of her childhood before the fever, and Jacob found himself opening up about his family in ways he had not done in years. "My brother Samuel was only 12 when he died," Jacob said one afternoon as they cleared rocks from the garden plot. "He wanted to be a doctor. Used to follow our mother around, learning about herbs and remedies. He was smart as a whip, always reading when he could get his hands on a book." "What would he think of you now, living up here in the mountains?" Catherine asked gently. Jacob paused, leaning on his shovel. "I think he would understand why I left, but he would be disappointed that I stayed away so long. Samuel always saw the best in people. Even when they did not deserve it, he would tell me I was wasting my life, hiding from my grief." "Are you? Hiding from grief?" "I was, but maybe not anymore." He looked at her directly, and their eyes met and held for a moment before Catherine looked away, color rising in her cheeks. The attraction between them was growing stronger each day, though neither acknowledged it openly. Jacob found himself making excuses to stay near the cabin rather than spending days at a time checking distant trap lines. Catherine put extra care into her appearance, washing her hair more frequently and wearing the better of her 2 dresses more often. One evening, after a supper of roasted rabbit and the first spring greens Catherine had foraged near the stream, Jacob pulled out a worn harmonica he kept in his pack. "Do you mind music?" he asked. "I would love to hear some," Catherine said, her face brightening. Jacob played slowly at first, rusty from lack of practice, but his fingers remembered the melodies his mother had loved, sweet and sorrowful tunes that spoke of longing and loss. Catherine closed her eyes, swaying slightly in her chair, and Jacob watched her face transform as the music washed over her. When he finished the last note, Catherine opened her eyes and he saw tears on her cheeks. "That was beautiful," she whispered. "I had forgotten how much I missed music. We never had any at the orphanage except for hymns on Sunday, and Matron Phelps had a terrible voice." "My mother played the fiddle," Jacob said. "She tried to teach me, but I could never get the hang of it. The harmonica was easier." "Would you play something happier? Something people might dance to?" Jacob obliged, launching into a lively jig. Without thinking, he stood and held out his hand. "Dance with me?" Catherine hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. It was the first time they had touched beyond accidental brushes while working, and Jacob felt electricity shoot up his arm at the contact. He led her in a simple country dance, spinning her around the small cabin while he attempted to play and dance at the same time. They both ended up laughing breathlessly, Catherine's face flushed and genuinely happy for the first time since he had known her. I cannot remember the last time I danced, Catherine said, still holding his hand. Maybe never. The orphanage did not allow such frivolity. Then we will have to do it more often, Jacob said. He realized he was still holding her hand and reluctantly released it. The loss of contact felt like a physical pain. That night, lying in the loft, Jacob admitted to himself what had been growing clearer each day. He was falling in love with Catherine Mills. Her strength, her gentleness, her resilience, her quiet beauty, all of it called to something deep in his soul. But he had promised her safety and respect, promised that she was just an employee. How could he tell her his feelings had changed without making her feel trapped? She had nowhere else to go. If he declared himself, and she did not return his feelings, she would feel obligated to leave, or, worse, to accept him out of gratitude or fear. The ethical dilemma kept him awake long into the night. Catherine, lying in her curtained alcove below, struggled with her own realization. She was falling for her employer, the mountain man who had rescued her from a life of servitude. Jacob was everything she had never dared to dream of, strong, kind, honorable, and gentle despite his rough exterior. When he looked at her, she felt seen in a way she never had before, not as a burden or a servant, but as a person of value. But how could she ever tell him? He had been clear that she was an employee, nothing more. She had no money, no skills beyond the domestic, nowhere to go if this arrangement ended. Confessing her feelings would put them both in an impossible position. If he rejected her, she would have to leave. And even if by some miracle he returned her feelings, how could she ever be sure it was not just loneliness and convenience driving him? Spring advanced into early summer, and the garden they had planted together began to show green shoots pushing up through the dark earth. Jacob brought home a setting hen and 6 chickens he had traded for Enrico, along with lumber to build a proper hen house. Catherine clucked over the birds like they were her own children, talking to them as she scattered feed and collected the eggs they soon began producing. The domesticity of it all should have felt stifling to Jacob after years of wilderness freedom, but instead, it felt like coming home after a long exile. One afternoon in late June, Catherine was washing clothes in the stream when she heard a commotion near the cabin. She dropped the shirt she was scrubbing and ran back to find a black bear nosing around the hen house, attracted by the smell of the chickens. The birds were in a panic, and Catherine knew if the bear got inside, they would all be killed. Without thinking, she grabbed a pot and wooden spoon and began banging them together while shouting at the top of her lungs, "Get out of here! Go on, get!" The bear, a young male not yet fully grown, startled at the noise and turned toward her. For a terrifying moment, Catherine thought she had made a fatal mistake. Then Jacob appeared from the tree line, his rifle raised. He fired a shot into the air, the report echoing off the mountains, and the bear bolted into the forest. Jacob ran to Catherine, who was shaking so hard she dropped the pot. "Are you insane?" he shouted, grabbing her shoulders. "You never approach a bear. You could have been killed." "The chickens," Catherine stammered. "I could not let it kill the chickens." "The chickens are not worth your life." Jacob pulled her against his chest, his heart pounding so hard she could feel it through his shirt. "God, Catherine, you scared me half to death." She realized he was holding her, really holding her, his arms wrapped tightly around her as if he could shield her from all danger. Slowly, she raised her arms and hugged him back, feeling the solid strength of him, the warmth of his body, the way his breath stirred her hair. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I did not think. I just reacted." Jacob pulled back just enough to look down at her face. His hands came up to cup her cheeks, and Catherine saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "I cannot lose you," he said roughly. "Do you understand? I cannot lose you." "Jacob," she breathed, and then his mouth was on hers. The kiss started gentle, almost tentative, as if he was afraid she might pull away. But Catherine rose on her toes and kissed him back with all the longing she had been suppressing for weeks. His arms tightened around her, and the kiss deepened, becoming urgent and desperate. All the walls they had carefully maintained between them came crashing down in that moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. "I am sorry. I should not have done that. I promised you that you would be safe here, that I would not force myself on you." "You did not force anything," Catherine said, her hands fisted in his shirt. "I wanted you to kiss me. I've wanted it for weeks now." "You have?" Jacob pulled back to search her face. "Catherine, I need you to be honest with me. Do you have feelings for me, or are you just grateful that I brought you here?" "At first, maybe it was gratitude," Catherine admitted. "But Jacob, it has been so much more than that for a while now. You make me laugh. You make me feel valued. When you look at me, I do not see pity or disdain in your eyes. I see respect and something else, something that makes me hope for things I thought I would never have. Like what? His voice was soft, his thumb stroking her cheekbone with infinite tenderness. Like love. Like a real home. Like a future that is not just an endless line of floors to scrub. Jacob closed his eyes, his expression almost pained. I love you, Catherine. I think I have loved you since I saw you standing in that street, refusing to be completely broken despite everything that woman said. You are the bravest, strongest, most beautiful woman I have ever known, and you are so much more than what anyone told you that you were. Catherine felt tears streaming down her face. I love you too. I did not think I was capable of love anymore, but you showed me that I was wrong. You gave me hope again, Jacob. You gave me myself. They kissed again, slower this time, savoring the moment. When they finally pulled apart, Jacob took her hand and led her to the cabin steps where they sat side by side. We should talk about what this means, Jacob said. I want to marry you, Catherine, if you will have me. I want you to be my wife, not just my employee. But I will not rush you. You have been through so much, and you deserve time to make sure this is what you really want. Catherine looked at their joined hands, his so much larger than hers, calloused from hard work but holding hers with such care. I do not need time to know what I want, but I need to know that this is not just about convenience or loneliness for you. I need to know that you truly want me. I want you more than I have ever wanted anything in my life, Jacob said fiercely. Not just to cook my meals or keep my house, though you do both wonderfully. I want you by my side through everything life brings. I want to fall asleep with you in my arms and wake up to your face. I want to build a real home with you, maybe raise children if we are blessed that way. I want to grow old watching you tend gardens and chase chickens and fill this cabin with life. Then yes, Catherine said, her voice strong and clear. Yes, I will marry you. Jacob swept her up in his arms, spinning her around as she laughed. The chickens, still agitated from the bear encounter, squawked indignantly at the commotion. They married a week later in Rico, with Henderson and his wife as witnesses. The ceremony was simple, held in the small church at the edge of town. Catherine wore a new dress that Jacob had insisted on buying her, a soft blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. Jacob had trimmed his beard and combed his long hair, looking almost civilized in clean clothes. As they spoke their vows, Catherine caught sight of Matron Phelps standing at the back of the church, her face twisted with anger and something that might have been jealousy. But Catherine felt no triumph, only pity. The matron had spent her life making others miserable because she was miserable herself, and she would die that way, alone and bitter. Catherine turned her attention back to Jacob, to the man who had shown her what love really meant, and spoke her vows with her whole heart. The ride back to the cabin as husband and wife felt different, charged with possibility and promise. Jacob had prepared the cabin as best he could, filling it with wildflowers and making sure everything was clean and welcoming. He had even rigged up a better curtain system to create a more private sleeping area, though Catherine suspected they would not be needing separate spaces anymore. That night, they came together as husband and wife with tenderness and passion. Jacob was gentle, aware that Catherine had never known a man's touch before, taking his time to make sure she felt cherished and safe. Catherine, in turn, gave herself completely, trusting him with her body as she had learned to trust him with her heart. Afterward, lying in the darkness with Catherine's head on his chest, Jacob traced lazy patterns on her arm and felt more at peace than he had in a decade. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "Happier than I knew it was possible to be," Catherine murmured. "Thank you for seeing something in me worth saving." "You saved yourself," Jacob said. "I just gave you the opportunity. Everything else, all this strength and grace and love, that was already inside you." Summer passed in a golden haze of happiness. The garden flourished under Catherine's care, providing them with fresh vegetables daily. The chickens laid eggs with impressive regularity. Jacob taught Catherine to fish in the stream and to identify edible plants in the forest. Catherine taught Jacob to make bread that did not resemble rocks, and to appreciate the small domestic comforts he had denied himself for so long. They talked for hours, sharing their histories and dreams for the future. Jacob admitted that he wanted to eventually move to a bigger property, maybe closer to Rico so they could be part of a community again. Catherine confessed her desire to help other orphans, to somehow make a difference for children in situations like she had been in. One evening in late August, as they sat outside watching the sunset over the mountains, Catherine spoke quietly. I think I might be pregnant. Jacob's head whipped around so fast she heard his neck crack. You think? Are you sure? Not completely sure. But I have missed my monthly courses, and I have been feeling queasy in the mornings. It could just be something I ate, but I think it is more than that. Jacob's face went through a series of expressions: shock, joy, fear, wonder, before settling on pure happiness. He pulled her into his lap, cradling her gently as if she might break. A baby. We are going to have a baby. Are you happy about it? Catherine asked, suddenly uncertain. They had never specifically talked about children, though he had mentioned them during his proposal. Happy does not begin to cover it, Jacob said. Terrified, yes, but mostly grateful. You have given me so much already, Catherine. You brought me back to life, and now you're giving me a family again. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. I'm scared too. What if I am not a good mother? What if I end up like Matron Phelps, cruel and bitter? That will never happen, Jacob said firmly. You have too much love in your heart. You showed that every day at the orphanage, caring for those children even when it cost you. Our child will be loved beyond measure, I promise you that. The pregnancy was confirmed when they made a trip to Rico and saw the town's doctor. Catherine was due in late March or early April. Jacob immediately began making preparations for the baby, building a cradle from pine and trading for soft fabrics Catherine could use to make blankets and clothing. As autumn arrived and the aspen trees turned gold, Catherine's belly began to swell with new life. She had never felt more beautiful or more cherished. Jacob treated her like she was made of glass, constantly worrying that she was overdoing it, insisting she rest more, and let him take over the heavier chores. One crisp October afternoon, as Catherine was hanging laundry to dry, she saw 3 small figures approaching on foot. Her heart leaped as she recognized them: Emma, Thomas, and Mary from the orphanage. Katie! Emma screamed, breaking into a run. The other 2 followed, and Catherine barely had time to brace herself before they crashed into her, all 3 talking at once. What are you doing here? Catherine asked, kneeling down despite her growing belly to hug them properly. How did you find me? We ran away, Thomas said proudly. Matron Phelps got even meaner after you left, and she hit Emma with a strap for spilling milk. So we left in the middle of the night and walked until we found a man who knew where the mountain man's cabin was. It took us 3 days. Catherine's heart clenched. These children, none older than 8, had walked for 3 days through wilderness to find her. You must be exhausted and starving. Come inside, let me feed you. Jacob emerged from the barn where he had been repairing a stall. He took in the scene with his characteristic calm and simply nodded. I will ride to Rico and let them know the children are safe. We can sort out the rest after they have had food and rest. Over bowls of soup and fresh bread, the children told their story. Matron Phelps had indeed become worse after Catherine left, taking out her anger on the remaining children. The woman who came weekly to check on the orphanage had seen evidence of abuse and was working to have Matron Phelps removed, but these 3 had not been able to wait. We thought maybe you could take us in, Mary said hopefully. We would work hard and not be any trouble. Catherine looked at Jacob, who had returned from Rico with the news that the sheriff and the county inspector were coming the next day to discuss the situation. Her husband's face was unreadable. Can we talk privately for a moment? Jacob asked. Catherine followed him outside, worried about what he might say. I know what you are going to ask, Jacob said before she could speak, and the answer is yes. Yes? Catherine repeated, not daring to hope. Yes, we can keep them. All 3, if that is what needs to happen. We will need to build an addition to the cabin, and it will be chaotic with a baby on the way and 3 children underfoot. But Catherine, I saw your face when those kids appeared. They need you, and I think you need them too. Catherine threw her arms around his neck, kissing him soundly. Thank you. Thank you so much. I know it is a lot, but I could not bear the thought of sending them back to that place. They are not going back, Jacob said firmly. Not if I have anything to say about it. The county inspector arrived the next day, a stern older woman named Mrs. Harrison. She interviewed the children separately, examined the marks on Emma's back from the strap, and listened to Catherine and Jacob's account of conditions at the orphanage. Matron Phelps will be removed from her position immediately, Mrs. Harrison declared. The county has been receiving complaints for months, but we needed solid evidence. These children's testimony, combined with the physical evidence of abuse, is more than enough. As for their placement, ordinarily they would be transferred to another orphanage in Durango. However, if you are willing to take them on, I can approve immediate foster placement with the possibility of adoption. "We will take them," Catherine and Jacob said simultaneously. Mrs. Harrison allowed herself a small smile. "Very well. I will need to conduct home visits quarterly to ensure the children are being properly cared for, but from what I have seen here today, I have no concerns. You have a lovely home, and these children clearly adore you both." After she left, Catherine gathered the children together and told them the news. Emma burst into tears of joy, while Thomas tried to look brave and manly despite his own tears. Mary simply smiled, a deep, peaceful smile that said she had known all along everything would work out. That winter tested them all. Jacob spent weeks building an addition to the cabin, creating a separate room for the children with 3 small beds and a window overlooking the stream. Catherine taught the children to read and write using a primer Jacob brought from Rico, and she told them stories every night before bed, just as she had at the orphanage. The children adapted to mountain life with surprising ease. Thomas proved to have a talent for working with animals and helped Jacob tend the chickens and the horse. Emma discovered a love of cooking and became Catherine's shadow in the kitchen. Mary, the quietest of the 3, had an artist's eye and spent hours drawing pictures of the mountains and forests around them. As Catherine's pregnancy advanced, the children took on more responsibilities without being asked. They understood, in the way children often do, that they were part of something special, a family born not from blood but from choice and love. Catherine went into labor on a cold night in early April. Jacob sent Thomas running to Rico to fetch the doctor while he stayed with Catherine, holding her hand and wiping her brow with a cool cloth. Emma and Mary huddled in the children's room, trying to be brave as they listened to Catherine's cries. The birth was long and difficult, and there were moments when Jacob feared he might lose her. But Catherine was strong, stronger than anyone gave her credit for, and as dawn broke over the mountains, she delivered a healthy baby boy. Samuel, Catherine gasped as Jacob placed the squirming infant in her arms. "We should name him Samuel, after your brother." Jacob felt tears stream down his face as he looked at his wife and newborn son. "Samuel Jacob Rollins. It is perfect." The children crowded into the room, marveling at the tiny baby with his shock of dark hair and his father's strong features. Thomas declared he would teach Samuel to fish and hunt. Emma promised to make him cookies whenever he wanted. Mary simply stroked his tiny hand with one gentle finger, her face full of wonder. As the morning sun filled the cabin with golden light, Jacob looked around at his unexpected family. Catherine, exhausted but radiant, holding their son. 3 children who had chosen them as much as they had chosen the children, a home filled with love and laughter and life. He thought about the man he had been just a year ago, isolated and half alive in his mountain fortress. And he thought about Catherine, scrubbing floors and believing she had no value beyond her ability to serve. "What are you thinking?" Catherine asked softly, noticing his expression. "I am thinking that Matron Phelps was wrong about everything," Jacob said. "She said you were only good for scrubbing floors. But Catherine, you are good for my heart. You healed something in me I thought was broken beyond repair. You gave me back my life, my faith in people, my ability to love. You gave me a family." Catherine reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "We gave each other those things. You saved me just as much as I saved you." "I am not sure about that," Jacob said with a small smile. "You saved me, you saved these 3 kids, and you even saved that setting hen from becoming bear food. You are quite the hero, Mrs. Rollins." Catherine laughed, the sound filling the cabin with joy. "I prefer to think of us as a team. We save each other every single day." The years that followed were full of the ordinary magic that makes up a life well lived. They officially adopted Emma, Thomas, and Mary, giving them the Rollins name and all the love and security they had been denied. Samuel grew into a sturdy, happy little boy who followed his older siblings everywhere, determined to keep up despite his shorter legs. 2 years after Samuel's birth, Catherine delivered twin girls, Helena and Rose. The cabin had to be expanded again, and Jacob eventually bought the property adjacent to his own, increasing their landholdings significantly. They built a larger house with proper bedrooms for everyone, though Catherine insisted on keeping the original cabin as a guest house and reminder of where their love story had begun. Thomas grew tall and strong like his adopted father, eventually taking over much of the physical labor on the property. He married at 21, bringing home a sweet girl from Rico named Sarah, and they built a house on the far corner of the property. Emma became a talented baker, and she and Catherine started selling bread and pies in Rico, earning enough money to fund Catherine's real dream. 5 years after leaving the orphanage herself, Catherine opened a new children's home in Rico, one run on principles of kindness and respect. She hired carefully, making sure everyone who worked there understood that children were precious gifts, not burdens to be tolerated. The old orphanage had been shut down after Matron Phelps was arrested for abuse and embezzlement. The woman died in prison 2 years into her sentence, alone and unmourned. Catherine's children's home became known throughout Colorado as a place where children were cherished. She placed every child who came through her doors into carefully vetted homes or found them good employment when they came of age. Some children she kept, expanding her own family to include 2 more adopted daughters and a son, all children who needed the special understanding that only someone who had walked that path herself could provide. Mary turned out to have not just an artist's eye, but genuine talent. Jacob paid for her to study in Denver, and she became a respected painter, though she always returned to the mountains for inspiration and family gatherings. Her paintings of the San Juan Mountains hung in galleries across the West, but her favorite works were the ones that decorated the Rollins family home, capturing moments of everyday love and beauty. Jacob never returned to his solitary trapping ways. Instead, he found purpose in building things. Homes for his growing family, the children's home for Catherine's dream, barns and schools and churches for the growing town of Rico. His strength and skill were legendary, but what people talked about most was the obvious devotion between him and his wife. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Jacob and Catherine stood on the porch of their home, watching their various children and grandchildren play in the yard. Samuel, now a young man of 19, was teaching his youngest sister to skip stones in the stream. Thomas's twin boys were climbing trees under Emma's watchful eye. Mary had come home from Denver with her new husband, an artist like herself, and they sat sketching the family scene together. "Do you ever regret it?" Catherine asked, leaning against Jacob's solid frame. "Giving up your quiet mountain life for all this chaos?" Jacob wrapped his arms around her, resting his chin on top of her head. Not for one single second. The mountains were beautiful, but they were just a hiding place. "You brought me back to life, Catherine. You and all these children we have been blessed with." "I never imagined this could be my life," Catherine said softly. "When I was scrubbing floors and listening to the matron tell me I was worthless, I could not have dreamed this much happiness existed in the world." "You were never worthless," Jacob said fiercely, even after all these years still angry at the woman who had tried to break his wife's spirit. "You were always extraordinary. You just needed someone to see it." "We saw it in each other," Catherine corrected. "That is the real gift, I think, not just being seen, but learning to see the truth in ourselves." Jacob turned her in his arms so he could look into her face. 20 years of love and laughter had only made her more beautiful in his eyes. The gauntness was long gone, replaced by the healthy glow of a woman well-loved and well-fed. Her auburn hair, now threaded with a bit of silver, was still her crowning glory. But it was her eyes that captivated him most, those green eyes that had first caught his attention in a dusty street in Rico. They sparkled with joy and peace, no longer shadowed by pain and fear. "I love you, Catherine Rollins," he said. "You are good for so much more than scrubbing floors. You are good for my heart, for these children's hearts, for everyone whose life you touch. You are a force of nature wrapped up in a deceptively small package." Catherine laughed and kissed him, still delighting in the freedom to show affection whenever she wanted. "And you, Jacob Rollins, are the mountain of a man who showed me what love really means. Strong enough to be gentle, powerful enough to be kind." "Gross," Samuel called from the stream. "Do you two have to kiss all the time?" "Yes," Catherine and Jacob called back in unison, making their son groan dramatically while his siblings laughed. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, the Rollins family gathered for supper. The table had to be extended with extra boards to accommodate everyone, and the noise level was tremendous as multiple conversations happened simultaneously. Children argued good-naturedly over who got the last roll. Adults discussed town news and family plans. Babies fussed and were soothed. It was chaos. It was imperfect. It was everything Catherine had never dared to hope for, and everything Jacob had thought he had lost forever. After the meal, as they did most evenings, Jacob pulled out his harmonica and played while the family sang together. The children begged for the story of how their parents met, even though they had heard it 100 times before. "Tell about when Papa rescued Mama from the mean lady," little Rose pleaded. Catherine exchanged a glance with Jacob and smiled. Well, it started on a day when I thought my life would never change. As she told the story, simplifying it for the younger children, Catherine marveled at the strange and wonderful way life unfolds. One moment of courage from a mountain man, one moment of brave choice from a broken girl, and everything had changed. Not just for them, but for all these children who now had a home and a family. Later that night, after all the children were finally asleep and the house had settled into peaceful silence, Catherine and Jacob lay in their bed with the window open to let in the cool mountain air. The sound of the stream running past the house had been a constant soundtrack to their life together, and neither could imagine sleeping without it. "What are you thinking about?" Jacob asked, stroking her hair. "Everything," Catherine said. "The way our lives have turned out, how one day can change everything, how love can heal wounds you thought were permanent." "It is pretty remarkable," Jacob agreed. "Sometimes I wake up and have to remind myself it is all real, that you are really here, that we really built this life together." "It is real," Catherine assured him, taking his hand and placing it over her heart so he could feel it beating. All of it. Every beautiful, chaotic, wonderful moment. "Any regrets?" he asked. Catherine thought about it seriously, as she always did when he asked that question. "I regret the suffering those children endured at the orphanage before we could help them. I regret the years I lost to fear and believing lies about my own worth. But the experiences that led me to you? No, I cannot regret those, because they made me who I am. They taught me empathy and resilience. They gave me the strength to build something better for the children who came after." "You are an amazing woman, Catherine Rollins." "We are an amazing team, Jacob Rollins. Never forget that part." They fell asleep in each other's arms as they had every night for 20 years, secure in the love they had built together. Years continued to pass, bringing the changes that time always brings. Children grew up and started their own families. Jacob's hair turned from dark brown to silver, though he remained strong and vital well into his 60s. Catherine's face gained lines around her eyes and mouth, lines earned from years of smiling and laughing. The children's home Catherine founded continued to thrive, and she trained a younger woman to eventually take over so she could focus more on her growing family. Emma's Bakery became famous throughout the region, and she eventually opened a second location in Durango. Thomas became a rancher and landowner in his own right, though he always remained close to his parents. Mary's paintings hung in museums and private collections across the country, but she never forgot where she came from or who had given her the freedom to pursue her dreams. Samuel, their firstborn biological child, became a doctor, fulfilling the dream his namesake uncle had held. He opened a practice in Rico and provided medical care to the entire region, often for little or no pay when families were struggling. He married a teacher named Rachel, and they had 4 children who called Catherine and Jacob Grandma and Grandpa with the same enthusiasm as all the other grandchildren. On a summer day, 43 years after Jacob had first walked across that street in Rico to defend a stranger, he and Catherine sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset over the mountains they both loved. They were both in their 60s now, still healthy and active but aware of time's passage. "It has been a good life," Jacob said, reaching for Catherine's hand. "The best life," Catherine agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." "Do you remember what Matron Phelps said about you? That you were only good for scrubbing floors?" Catherine smiled. "I do. But I also remember what you said, that I was good for your heart." "You still are," Jacob said, "every single day. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Catherine. You brought me back to life and gave me a reason to rejoin the world. Everything good in my life traces back to you." "We gave each other everything," Catherine said. "That is what real love does. It multiplies joy and divides sorrow. It makes 2 people stronger together than they ever could be apart." As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, their children and grandchildren began arriving for the weekly family supper they still maintained. The house filled with noise and laughter, with hugs and stories, with all the beautiful chaos of a family built on love. Jacob pulled Catherine close, breathing in the familiar scent of her, feeling grateful for every single day they had been given together. From a chance encounter on a dusty street to a lifetime of love and family, their story had unfolded in ways neither could have imagined. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "For what?" Catherine asked. "For being brave enough to leave with a stranger, for taking a chance on a broken mountain man who did not know how to live among people anymore, for loving me and building this amazing life with me, for being exactly who you are." Catherine pulled back to look into his face, seeing the love and gratitude shining in his eyes. Thank you for seeing past the broken girl scrubbing floors to the woman I could become. Thank you for giving me a home, a family, a purpose, and a love that has sustained me through everything. Thank you for being my mountain man, my protector, my partner, my love. They kissed, soft and sweet, a kiss that spoke of decades of devotion and a love that had only grown deeper with time. Around them, their family laughed and talked, the legacy of two people who had found each other when both were lost. Catherine Mills, who had once believed she was only good for scrubbing floors, had built an empire of love. She had rescued countless children, raised a family that spanned 2 generations, and created a home that was a beacon of warmth and welcome to everyone who entered. Jacob Rawlins, who had hidden in the mountains to escape his pain, had found healing in the arms of a woman society had discarded. He had built homes and buildings that still stood strong, but his greatest construction was the family he and Catherine had created together. As the evening wore on and the mountains stood silent, witness to another family gathering, Catherine reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From orphan to servant to beloved wife and mother, her path had been long and difficult, but every step had been worth it. She thought of that day in the street, when a tall stranger had stepped between her and the matron's wrath. She remembered the terror of leaving everything familiar, even though it was painful and limiting. She remembered the slow blooming of love, the joy of being valued, the peace of finally coming home. "What are you thinking about?" Jacob asked, reading her expression in the way only a spouse of many years could. "I'm thinking about how wrong she was," Catherine said. "The matron. She thought she was proclaiming my fate when she said I was only good for scrubbing floors. But she was really just showing her own limitations. She could not imagine that a girl like me could be worthy of love, could build a life of meaning and purpose. Her lack of vision became my motivation." "To prove her wrong?" Jacob asked. "No," Catherine said thoughtfully. "To prove myself right. To show that every person has value, even when the world tries to convince them otherwise. To create a different story for children who came after me." Jacob squeezed her hand. "You did that and more, my love. You changed the world, one child at a time, one act of love at a time." The night grew late, and eventually the family began to drift home, children sleepy on their parents' shoulders, promises made to return next week for another gathering. Catherine and Jacob saw them off, standing together on the porch as wagons and horses carried their beloved family back to their own homes. When the last light had disappeared down the road, they went inside to their quiet house. Catherine banked the fire while Jacob locked the doors, the comfortable routine of partners who knew each other's rhythms perfectly. In their bedroom, they prepared for sleep in the peaceful silence of long companionship. As they lay down together, Catherine curled into Jacob's side, her head on his chest, his arm around her shoulders. "Good night, my heart," Jacob murmured. "Good night, my mountain man," Catherine replied. They drifted off to sleep together as they had for more than 4 decades, 2 souls who had found each other against all odds and built a love that would echo through generations. The mountains stood eternal outside their window, witness to a love story that had begun with cruelty and transformed into a testament to the healing power of kindness. Catherine Mills, who had been told she was only good for scrubbing floors, had proven herself good for so much more. She had been good for Jacob's heart, good for her children's lives, good for an entire community that had been blessed by her presence. And Jacob Rawlins, the mountain man who had tried to escape humanity, had found his humanity restored by the love of an extraordinary woman. Together, they had built something that would last far beyond their own lifetimes, a legacy of love, family, and the unshakable belief that every person has worth, no matter what anyone else might say. In the morning, they would wake and begin another day, surrounded by the life they had built together in the mountains of Colorado. There would be grandchildren to spoil, work to be done, meals to share, and the 1,000 small joys that make up a life well lived. But for now they slept peacefully in each other's arms, 2 hearts beating as one, the scrub woman and the mountain man who had found in each other everything they had been missing. Their story, which had begun with words of cruelty, had been rewritten into a tale of love triumphant, proving once and for all that the matron had been wrong about everything that mattered. Catherine Mills Rawlins was good for so much more than scrubbing floors. She was good for love, for life, for building a better world one kind act at a time. And Jacob Rawlins had been right from the very beginning. She was indeed very, very good for his heart.